That's what we're talking about today, anxiety. Now, I know no one in this room struggles with anxiety, and so I'm gonna give you some helpful information just in case you ever have an anxious moment, all right? So we started this series a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and we've been going through and looking at the major emotions that people have and how we can control them. And really, a better way to say that than controlling them is managing them, because I just don't know that we're ever going to be in complete control all the time. Go to the next picture. So last week we did this. This is what's up here is on this board right here. This is the wheel of emotion, the wheel of fortune. So you wake up in the morning and go, oh, let's see what today is. And we got happy, we got angry, we got sad, surprise, disgust. Now, the experts, whoever those are, they came up with I just did some research, and they said, basically your emotions are categorized into 6 main categories. And the one that says disgust and the one that says surprise, those vary. Different people have different names for those, but for the most part, this is the same for everybody. And so what we said is each week we're going to go through and look at a different one. The first week we looked at happy, And what I said, listen, this is not pie in the sky. I said the goal for all of us should be to want to be happy. Like, I want to be happy every day of my life. I don't always have joy, but that's kind of the goal. And so what we talked about last week is sadness. And sadness is the opposite of happiness, and one of the opposites. And so what I try to do is I try to look for things that rob me of my joy, whether that's people, whether that's things, whatever it is, and try to remove those, because there's some very easily things that we can do if you do these things that can put the joy back into your life. So today is on anxiety. Now, if you look at this wheel right here. Go to the next one. So today we're going to focus in on fear. Fear is the main thing. But when I was studying for this, I was like, I think I just want to zero in on these other emotions come out of fear, like all of these other on the outer circle. And so you got out of fear, you have being scared, being anxious, being rejected, feeling insecure, and then a myriad of others. And I wanted to focus in today on anxiety, just because I just look every single day of my life, I encounter people who are just anxious people just struggling with anxiety, panic attacks, all these things. And so I did some research on this. Here's some other things besides what's on the outside. Here's some other synonyms for fear. You got worry, you got panic, angst, dread, dismay, distress, and a lot of others too. And all of those come out of the emotion of fear. Now, in studying for this, and again, I've been overwhelmed with just studying for this, because it's so much information, and I'm trying to pick through I'd watch a video like this is some good information about our emotions, and try to narrow down what I wanted to say was very difficult, because I don't want to give you too much and overwhelm you guys. But I look at these emotions as there's positive emotions and there's negative emotions. Now, the negative emotions are not necessarily bad, because I believe that I think God gives us these negative emotions. I think sometimes they're an indicator that something's not right. It's God's way of letting us know that something's not right in our system. Just like on your car, the check engine light comes on, and what do? You ignore it until one day it starts blinking, and then now it's time to take it in to go check it out, because something's really wrong. All right? So, but I've been burdened with this. I've seen a lot of people just overwhelmed with a lot of stuff. Let me give you some categories under fear that I just want to talk about. So there's the word overwhelmed, okay? I see a lot of people who are overwhelmed with stuff, and they're struggling with anxiety and depression and myriad of other things, but the bottom line is they're overwhelmed. And you want to know why you get overwhelmed? And I hate to presume upon you. I'll just say for me, you know why at times I get overwhelmed and I just feel like smothered? It's because I put too much on my plate. It's because, and when I pray about it, I feel like God's saying, Joey, but like I have a family, and I have a job, and I have responsibilities. But in addition to that, I have all external things, other things that I like to do. And sometimes I get overwhelmed with everything I'm doing, and I feel like God says, well, you're doing too much. take some of those things off of your plate. And we feel guilty about that because we live in this fast-paced society and everybody just fills up their day. And very few people that I know in this society have an easy time with resting. Like I don't know very many people that do that really well. Even like my wife and I, as soon as I say amen today, we're getting in the car and we're driving to Florida. And we're going on vacation down there. And I just want to tell you, this is not going to be a restful week for my wife or myself. This is not. It probably will for my kids. You know, they're living their best life. But my wife and I are just going to be stressed all the time, making sure they don't drown in the ocean. And, so we don't do a good job of that. But I think when you get overwhelmed, it's just an indicator that you're doing too much. And I think God's going, listen, you got to work your job and you got to have your family, you got responsibilities. But you don't need to do all this other stuff necessarily that you put on your plate. Go to the next slide. I don't know how many of you guys relate to this, but you got too many plates spinning. I think of a lot of the moms in our church with this. They got, just plates spinning, and you got to keep the plate spinning, and that's when you get overwhelmed because you're just like, I can't keep up with school. I can't keep up with the family stuff. And in that initial intro video, they talked about, I got all this stuff going on, and now I got to figure out what's for dinner, and I know that overwhelms my wife too. She works a job and comes home, and she's like, I got to get dinner ready and all that. So it can be a lot. All right, here's the next one is just stress. Stress. You can leave that up for a little bit. Stress. Here's what I came across this. Let me know if you just see if this sounds right. Stress is your body's reaction to a challenge or demand. It can be positive because it can motivate you to get stuff done. And it says that we live in a constant state of being stressed, and it takes a toll on your body. And you guys know this, right? So being stressed, if you have a paper due and you're in college or in school and you have a paper due, that stress is a good indicator. You need to get that done, right? And how many of you where's my procrastinators in the room? You love to put stuff off to the last minute, and that creates even more stress in your life. But the problem is, the good thing is that stress can motivate you to get stuff done, but the bad thing is if you are always under stress, eventually it takes a toll on your body, and it leads to high blood pressure, ulcers, all of that. You know what I mean? Like, it can really affect your body in negative ways. And so here's the next one, is worry. This is another category, worry. Here's the two main things that I know about worry. People worry about something that's coming up, or they worry about stuff that might happen and it might not ever happen. You know what I mean? Like, if you think about, I want you to just think about this week when you start to worry. I want you to think about how much time you give to worrying over something that's never going to happen. People worry all the time over stuff that's not even a possibility. But then there's things that people, maybe you're worried because you have a doctor's appointment coming up, or you have this hard meeting, conversation that you have to have with somebody. There's any number of things that cause us to worry, but don't give much time, really any time, to worrying about stuff that's never going to happen. Here's another one, panic attacks. Anybody get panic attacks? Yeah. I never really got panic attacks. In fact, I watched the video this week on, there's like indicator, and I don't even remember what but they're like, you got to have these 4 things, like shortness of breath, and to consider it a panic attack. But I've never really struggled with that, and I had a conversation with my wife yesterday about, like, do you have panic attacks? And she's like, no, or anxiety, and she was like, no, I don't really, not that much. And I was trying to think, I have had, I would say, a couple of panic attacks through the years. And so you know what they say to do. Whenever you have a panic attack and you're hyperventilating, you remember what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to take a paper bag. Anyone ever done this before? You take a paper bag and you breathe into it. Does it work? Does it work? Okay. Did you know that doctors say now you're not supposed to do that? It's dangerous for you. You could actually pass out. And I started reading on it, and I was going to do it, but I was like, I don't want to pass out up here. Because what they said, the rationale was, they said your oxygen levels and your breathing is irregulated, and you need to get that regulated. And so what you do is you breathe out the carbon dioxide into the bag and then put it back in, and that will help regulate you. And doctors are now going, no, that's stupid. Why would they ever say that? Because it's, you really could pass out by doing that. And so anyways, which is why a lot of people don't like wearing masks, because you're like, I'm putting that back in my mouth. But anyways, but panic attacks. So give you a couple of analogies, a couple of stories. Tamara's in here, and Tamara didn't know I was going to use her as a guinea pig today. But she posted something on Facebook publicly, so I feel like I could use it. You know what I mean? Like, if you post something on Facebook, it's fair game. It's probably going to be a sermon illustration. So even if you don't, you're probably going to be a sermon illustration. No, but a couple weeks ago, she posted something and said she had to go to the doctor. And a lot of you guys read this. She was like just really feeling anxious about going to the doctor and getting an MRI. Anyone ever have an MRI? If you're claustrophobic, that's terrifying, right? And so she just posted like I'm just pray for me because I don't want to go get this MRI. And then she posted on afterwards. She was like, all right, I made it through. That was the worst thing I've ever been through. It was hard, something to that effect. And then a couple days later, she's like, I called the doctor's office and they lost my files. And so they want me to come back in and do it again. And I was like, that's either a test from God or Satan is really working overtime on you. I don't know which that was, but somebody's trying to teach you something. And so she had to go back. Like the worst experience of her life, had to do it again the very next week. And so, but that might give you panic attacks. I found out, I don't know if anyone ever done any swimming in here. So Jared, who's not here today, but Jared and I decided at the end of the summer we're going to do a sprint triathlon because, why not? We got nothing else going on. Might as well train for that. I don't even like running, so we figured let's do a triathlon. And so, anyways, we started training. And if you know anything about a sprint triathlon is about half of like a regular triathlon. And so you got to swim for 400 yards, and then you have to bike for 11 miles, and then you have to run a 5K, which is 3.1 miles. I looked at that and I was like, I can do that. And I was like, I'm a decent swimmer. And I got in the pool a few weeks ago to start training for this and realized I am not a good swimmer, at all. Like, I can doggy paddle and I can swim. I can keep from drowning, but I've never swam in, competition. And I realized that. I'm like, you're supposed to have goggles on and you're supposed to put your head down. And I started doing that, and I was having a panic attack, my breathing. I was panicking. I was like, let me watch some YouTube videos on this. And I was watching YouTube videos on how to swim. I felt stupid because I was like, I know how to swim, but I don't know how to swim like the Olympians. And so this one guy was just talking about, you've got to learn how to breathe without panicking. And whenever he said that, I was like, a week earlier, I wouldn't have known what he was talking about. But now, when you're swimming really fast and you try to gasp for air, as you're still swimming, taking strokes, it's hard. And what I found myself doing was panicking. So last weekend, me and Jared were like, okay, we've been swimming in the pool and getting pretty good at that. Let's go out to the lake because the triathlon is at the lake, out at Longview Lake. So we went out to Blue Springs Lake to practice, and we were in this cove. It was 200 yards across and 200 yards back. We're like, no problem. So we started swimming, and I feel better because I got farther than he did, you know what I mean? But he got about from here to that back chair back there, and he was about to drown. And I got about twice that far, and I'm like, what is going on? The waves were coming up, and I was drinking water, and I thought I was going to die. I was literally panicking. Luckily, I had my son out there with the kayak, and I was holding on. But I realized that's a different animal. Do you know why? It was terrifying to me. First of all, I didn't have my breathing regulated, but in the pool, when I was swimming, whenever I started feeling panicked, you know what I did? I just put my feet down and I stood up. I'm like, I'm just going to rest for about 15 minutes and then do it some more. But you can't do that when your feet don't touch the bottom. And so that was terrifying. And so I just went through this thing so I guess pray for me and Jared. We got to figure out how to swim in a lake without drowning, But so I get that panic part about that. And here's what I found out about panic attacks. Panic attacks are a manifestation of fear. Like whatever you're panicked about is directly related to something that you're fearful about. All right, and then here's another one. Here's the one that we're talking about today is anxiety. And just talk about this. We're going to come back to it. But anxiety is we know what anxiety is, but and I'll give you the definition in just a little bit, but does anyone in here struggle with anxiety? Like, you put yourself out there? Yeah. Most people do in some form or fashion. I'll tell you when the thing, because I like to think I don't that often, but when I started thinking about this stuff, I'm like, it's probably more than I thought. And something happened to me recently. I went to the dentist. Anyone done that lately? You go to the dentist. Does going to the dentist give you anxiety? Okay, so I've never had any teeth taken out, and I have one wisdom tooth that grew in sideways, and I've been going to get my teeth cleaned for years, and every time they take an x-ray, they're like, you got to get that pulled, and I'm like, well, it doesn't hurt, so I'm not going to do it. You know what I mean? That's just how I am. I don't have insurance for it, and I just don't want to pay all the money, and I'm stubborn. Anyways, so finally, back in the spring, I got my teeth cleaned. They're like, yeah, you really need to get this taken out. So I said, okay. So I set up an appointment, and so I went back. This was like April or May, and I went in, and my wife's great because she bought me special food and all this stuff. She was like, you're gonna whatever, because you're just gonna need special food for a while. And I tried to plan it on like a Monday, so I'd have to, because I'm preaching on Sunday, I don't want my mouth to be numb. And so I go in and I sit down to have this consultation. I was supposed to go get my tooth pulled that day, and I'm about to have a panic attack as it was. Like, I'm just freaking out. And then I sat down with a guy, and I go, oh, I forgot to ask you about this. You're going to put me under, right? And he was like, no, we don't put you under here. We just inject it with Novocaine and numb it. And I was like, I'm out. And I got up and walked out. I was like, I'm not doing that. I don't know. Maybe it's fine. Has anyone got their teeth pulled with just Novocaine? Okay. You guys are heroes. I'm not, that's not going to be me, all right? So I went and I found a dentist that will do it by putting me under, and I'm just like, yeah, that's what I got to do because my fear is too much. Go to this next slide. Here's the definition of anxiety. Anxiety is a fear of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event like going to the dentist or something with an uncertain outcome, right? And so a lot of people struggle with these things. A lot of people have anxiety about COVID. Like, this last 2 years has been really hard, and people have, I know some people that say that's irrational fear, but I know a lot of people who go, I'm not, they have anxiety about COVID, but they go, I'm not worried about me, but I have a loved one who's not in good health, and if I get it and carry it home to them, then that's going to be a problem. But this last 2 years has created a lot of anxiety in a lot of people. There's other things. Visiting a church for the first time is anxious for a lot of people. You're just like, I don't know what's going on in there, because maybe you've had a bad experience in another church. You're like, I'm going to try this new church, and we'll see. I don't know if they're going to be handling snakes. I don't know what's going on up there. A lot of anxiety. Here's one. A lot of people have anxiety about using a public bathroom. Right? Anybody want to put themselves out there? My wife does. She's raising her hand. She will not use a public bathroom, and probably for good reason. So I did a Facebook post last week, and I just said, what gives you anxiety? And I was surprised. I had 105 people comment on there, and here's some of the comments that they made. One person said death. She was like, that gives me anxiety. Several people said going to the dentist. One of my friends said, my ex-wife. That was interesting. A lot of variations of not being in control or the uncertainty of the future. Like that gives a lot of people anxiety, just not knowing what's coming up. And so I was going to ask you a question. What gives you anxiety? I'll tell you, one of the things that gives me anxiety is my kids. Amen? Kids can give you anxiety. I was semi-kidding about that, but semi-not. I'll tell you, the thing that gives me the most anxiety, and this happens on a weekly basis, is you. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but I sit down every week to write a sermon, and I start with nothing, and I have this thought in my head, and my first prayer to God is, Lord, you're going to have to help me because I got nothing. So most of you guys have never preached a sermon and probably never will, but maybe you've taught Sunday school. Anyone in here ever been terrified about getting up and giving a speech in public? Like you had to write a speech. Public speaking is terrifying for some people. And You ever had the dream where you're sitting in school naked or you're in your underwear? You ever had that dream? It's okay. There's a reason you have that dream. It's out of your fears. But anyways, I don't have those dreams. My nightmares are I walk up here to the pulpit and I stand here and I look out and there's a bunch of people out here, but I got nothing to say. Like I got no notes. I didn't study this week, and I'm just like I don't know what. And then I wake up in a cold sweat. That's my anxiety right there. But for a lot of people, it's different things. Speaking in public, it's anxiety about being in crowds. There's a lot of people. There's people right now watching online on Facebook because they're terrified of you guys. They're terrified of crowds, and I get that too. I'll give you the one panic attack that I had. I don't know if it's a panic attack, but a few years ago, probably 4 years ago, I was asking my wife now, and I don't know where I was at. I don't remember the details, but my wife was in her car with my 4 kids. And they were on their way somewhere. They were out by 4:35. I got a phone call from her, and she said, "Hey, can you come help me? My car's broke down. I don't know if you got a flat tire or what it was. I think it's a flat tire. And the car broke down at 4:35 right at Metcalf. And it wasn't the outside shoulder. It was the inside shoulder. And so I was 30 minutes away. And so I got in my car, and I don't remember where I was at, but I just remember that whole 30 minutes just praying and just playing out all of these scenarios. Because you know how that is. People are on their phones now, and they'll just veer right into and crash into a car on the side of the road. And that's what I must have envisioned that 30 times going down the road, just pulling up and seeing my family strung out all over the road. Just horrible things, and I just had to keep going back and just praying about it. And then I even remember pulling up and going, okay, we got to get the kids out of the car and into my car and get out of here without getting kids. I mean, 4:35 is a busy thing. And I just remember just being crippled with fear and anxiety in that moment. And I just had to give that over to God. And here's the last one that I wanted to talk about, and that's depression. And we talked about that a little bit last week, but that's born out of fear too. And it's the feeling of hopelessness. Most people who struggle with depression are feeling hopeless, and they don't see a way out, and that's when a lot of times that can lead to suicide. And on the way back from our missions trip, I was listening to this pastor talk about this, and he was talking about, he said more people die from suicide every year than murder. He said, so I just thought this was interesting. He goes, so you're more likely to die at your own hands than the hands of another person, which is crazy. So more people die from suicide than murder every single year. And so this is why we're talking about some of this stuff. So if you're taking notes, I got a couple of observations about this. Number one is it's normal to experience negative emotions, okay? It's normal to be emotional. God made us that way, and sometimes we feel like there's something wrong with me because I'm experiencing these negative emotions. But go to the next slide, guys. And then the next one. I want to give you these 3 quotes. These are from Lori Carpenter. So she had the video last week, and she sent me some of this stuff about anxiety. And here's what she said. I just want to read it. Said, your brain is hardwired to look for or notice the negative, so to feel more positive. So she says, your brain and my brain, and I can relate to that. It's hardwired to look for the negative. So she said, so to feel more positive emotions, you have to intentionally focus on things to be grateful for and to find the positive or possible. We talked about that last week. Fix your thoughts on things that are true and right and pure and lovely and all that. And then she goes on, the next one, most negative thinking stems from some sort of fear of rejection, loss, abandonment, success, or failure, etc. Yet being aware you are afraid of something is often masked with your secondary emotions like anger. And then the last one, emotions aren't good or bad. They all have something to teach us or show us. It is the thoughts that need to change. Remember we talked about that last week? The way to control your emotions is to control your thoughts. And she gave an example. Anxiety and excited create the exact same physiological response. One we label as good, the other we label as bad. When we tell ourselves, what we tell ourselves about what we are feeling, sets of a series of stress response in the body. Okay, so I just thought that was good. So let's go on. I want to give you number 2 and number 3 observations. God made us emotional beings because we were created in his image. That's the reason why we experience emotions. God has emotions, and we see that throughout the Bible. Number 3, God has emotions, and Jesus showed emotions while on earth. We know several emotions that Jesus demonstrated. One of them was, anger. One of them was he was sad whenever Lazarus died. In John chapter 11, the shortest verse in the Bible says what? Jesus wept. He was upset, and he was mournful for the loss of his friend. So if you have a Bible, we're going to turn to Matthew 26, all right? This is the passage that I wanted to get to about Jesus. And guys, hear me right. We're going to use Jesus as an example of somebody who was gripped with anxiety, but I'm not trying to be blasphemous about this because I don't think, obviously Jesus never sinned, but it gives me encouragement to see that even Jesus was really paralyzed with fear about what was coming up. So this is the night before he was crucified. He went into the Garden of Gethsemane to pray with his disciples. And here's what it says, verse 36. It says, then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane. And he said, sit here while I go over there to pray. And he took the 12 disciples in there, or the 11, and then he says, sit here, I'm going to go pray. He took Peter and James and John and a little bit further, and it says this is Jesus, he became anguished and distressed. He told them, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. You ever felt that before? You ever felt just like overpowered with anxiety? Like he says, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. He told them, he goes, sit here and keep watch with me. He went a little further and bowed his face to the ground, praying, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken from me. He says, yet I want your will to be done, not mine. So in that moment, what Jesus knew was about to happen. A little bit later, they were going to come and arrest him. They were going to beat him. They were going to gamble for his clothes. They were going to put a crown of thorns on his head. And then they were going to nail him to a cross where he would die on that cross, paying for the sins of the whole world. Now, what he was anxious about was not the fact that he was going to have to die on a cross. It wasn't even the fact that he was going to have to die. What Jesus was not looking forward to in his humanity was he knew the burden that he was going to bear by God at that point. At one point when he was on the cross, God took the sins of the whole world, yours and mine and everyone in human history, and took all of those sins and laid them on Jesus, his son, and he bore those sins for us. And that was probably the most excruciating thing that could ever been felt. And that's what Jesus was not looking forward to. And what he said was, he told his Father, he said, if there's any other way, if you got a plan B, let's do plan B. He says, but not my will be done, but yours. And so what we have to do, this is great. I'm just telling you, there are things that God asked me to do, that God has for me to do in my life, and I don't want to do it. And they create anxiety and angst in my life and worry and fear, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. But at the end of that, I just have to say, but I don't want my will to be done, God. If this is your will, then I'm going to do it, even if it requires something really hard from me. That's what we ultimately have to do. And then you know the story. If you were here a few weeks ago, I talked about this. So Jesus goes, sit here and pray, and I'm going to go over there and pray. Jesus goes over and prays, and he comes back a little bit later, and he finds them. What were they doing? Were they praying? They were sleeping, which is exactly what I would have been doing. They were sleeping, and Jesus rebuked them. He was like, wake up, we got to pray. He goes, I'm going back over there to pray. You sit here. And he goes over and prays for a little while, comes back, and they were sleeping again. And then he goes back, and he's praying some more. The third time he comes back, and he just looks at him, and I think he just shook his head, and he was like, really? And he goes, you couldn't even keep watch with me for 1 hour? And then at that point, he told him, he goes, just go ahead and stay asleep, because what's done is done. And so he allowed them to sleep. But he was disappointed in them. And what he said is, he goes, keep watch and pray so that you will not give into temptation. He goes, for the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. I get that. Do you get that? Your spirit is willing, but your body is weak. Yeah, so we get that. All right, well, let's finish this out with this. Go to the next slide. I want to talk about how we can cope with this. I want to give you some practical things that you can do. And look, this is not all there is. Like I told you, when I was studying for this, there was so much information about anxiety. I was like, how am I going to give all this? And I didn't want to give everything to you, so I just tried to pick out a few things. But here's how, I just want you to look at me for a second. Here's how most people, I don't know about most people, but I know a lot of people that cope with anxiety and their fears in the wrong way. Like there's a healthy way to do it, and then there's an unhealthy way to do it, and you know that. And drinking all the time is an unhealthy way to do that. I know so many people that can't, they're just overwhelmed and stressed out all the time, and so they're like, I just need a drink to take the edge off, and then one drink turns into 9, and then before they know it, they have to have a drink every night before bed, or they can't sleep right. I know some people that do the same thing with smoking pot. They do that with prescription pills. They go, I just need these to take the edge off. And then after a while, you need them. Like after a while, you're self-medicating, and you don't think that you can get through life without taking these things. And I want you to know that you absolutely can. And what you're really doing, you're just trying to numb the pain. You're trying to feel different. You're trying to keep from feeling that pain. But sometimes feeling it is what we need to do. And there's a better way to handle these things. So let's talk about that. The first one is this. Number one, try to figure out what the real problem is. Because if you were to come in and talk to me and say, Pastor Joey, I got these fears, and I got, here's why I'm self-medicating, doing all that, I would ask you, well, what's really going on? Like, what is the real problem? What's the root of what's going on? And if you never get to that, then you're never going to fix the problem. You're just masking the pain. Number two is you need to play the tape. We talk about this in recovery all the time. You need to play out how this is going to work out. But this sermon that I was listening to on the way back from the missions trip was talking about this. He was talking about playing out the tape. And I thought it was interesting because he said, okay, you have some fears. They might be irrational. They might be rational. But you need to play out how that's going to. So like for me, I have a fear of going to the dentist to get my teeth pulled. And it just ends with that, and I'm paralyzed. I'm like, I'm not going. And so I just need to think about it. Okay, what if I go and it hurts a little bit, and eventually it'll stop hurting, and then I'll be better off in the long run? Or whatever situation is plaguing you with fears and anxieties, you need to play out the tape. I got a doctor's appointment that I got to go to, and I don't know if it's cancer or whatever. Well, oftentimes it's things that's never going to happen. But one of the things this guy talked about, he goes, for the Christian, for the believer, and this is where I'm at, even if it's the worst news and it's the worst possible scenario that plays out, it ends in me dying, but dying for the believer is actually the beginning of the rest of their life. So you get to step into the presence of Jesus, and that's really when the payoff is. That's when it really gets good. And so you just need to play that out and just go, okay, God, it's going to happen to all of us. We got to figure that out. But play out. And when you do that, it oftentimes takes away the fear. Number 3, just if you're taking notes, remember that God is bigger than whatever problem you're facing. I'm reading this book right now by Mark Batterson, and it's called In the Pit with a Lion. And if you've ever read the Old Testament, Benaiah was one of David's mighty men. Benaiah was a warrior. He killed a giant. He just did some crazy things. And one time it says that on a snowy day, he went down into a pit to kill a lion, and he killed a lion there, which is crazy. The whole book is just about fear and how people like Benaiah don't have fear. Like most people, when they see a lion, they run the other way, but he didn't. He ran towards him and chased him in. There's some people that are just wired differently. People that I know who are police officers and firemen, they don't run from danger. They run to it to rescue people. Those are heroes, military people. And so some people are just wired like that. And it's not that those people don't have fears. It's just they've learned to move past their fears. And in the book, one of the things he talks about, he says that some people have a low view of God and some people have a high view of God. And I just want to read to you a quote out of the book. He said, most of our problems are perceptual. Our biggest problems can be traced back to an inadequate understanding of who God is. Our problems seem really big because our God seems really small. In fact, we reduce God to the size of our biggest problem. A.W. Tozer said, a low view of God is the cause of hundreds of lesser evils, but a person with a high view of God is relieved of 10,000 temporal problems. And that's just I know that to be true. Whenever I'm paralyzed with fear, it just is telling me that I don't think that God is very big. And so we have to go back and just remember that God is bigger than our problems. All right, so I'm going to close out with a couple of verses here, a couple of scriptures. And in Matthew 6, if you have a Bible, you know, turn there. I read this week, and it seems like a paradox of sorts. So Jesus, this is the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus preached this about not worrying, and yet later, right before he was going to die, in my opinion, he was worrying, and he had anxiety, and the Bible says that he sweat like great drops of blood. I mean, he was very worried about that, and that just shows his humanity. He didn't sin, but he just shows us that, you know, because at the end of that, he said, not my will, but your will be done. But here's what he taught in the Sermon on the Mount. He said in verse 25, he goes, that is why I tell you not to worry about everyday life, whether or not you have enough food and drink or enough clothes to wear. He says, isn't life more than food and your body more than clothing? Look at the birds. They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, for your heavenly Father feeds them. Aren't you far more valuable than they are? Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? Can they? Let me ask you this. That's not a rhetorical question. Just answer me. Does worry add any moments to your life, or does it take away? In many cases, you're taking years off of your life. You're taking time off of your life by worrying. You're developing ulcers. You're developing high blood pressure. All of these things from worry. He says in verse 28, and why worry about your clothing? Look at the lilies of the field and how they grow. They don't work or make their clothing, yet Solomon in all his glory was not as dressed as beautifully as they are. And if God cares so wonderfully for the wildflowers that are here today and thrown into the fire tomorrow, he will certainly care for you. Why do you have so little faith? And then in verse 31, he says, so don't worry about these things, saying, what will we eat? What will we eat? What will we drink? What will we wear? These things dominate the thoughts of unbelievers, but your heavenly Father already knows your needs. So he says, so seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. So don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow brings its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today. Isn't it? Isn't today enough for today? You don't really need to stress about tomorrow because today's got enough. All right, let me give you two other ones and then we're done. Philippians 4, I read this earlier. Philippians 4 says, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. He says, don't be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. He says, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And then he goes on and talks about fixing your mind on what's true. And here's the last one. 1 Peter 5, verse 7. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. So that's what you're supposed to do with your anxiety. You're supposed to give it to God and let him take it from you. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to do something a little bit different, and this is going to make some of you very uncomfortable. I do have a video that we're going to close out, but everyone, I want you to close your eyes right now, and I want you to bow your heads, just in an attitude of prayer. And one of the things that this last song that we're going to close out with is a song by Johnny Diaz, and it's called Breathe. And go ahead and just play this song, this music. This is like elevator music, just to kind of lighten the mood a little bit, and then we'll get to the video. Because what I think, for the vast majority in this room, I think you're too stressed out. I think you're too busy. I think that you're running here and there and everywhere, and every minute of your day is filled up with stuff. And you know, that's not how God created us. God created us and said, I want you to work 6 days, and then I want you to rest. I want you to take a day off. And most people in this room, you do terrible at resting. I know I do. Even on my day off, I'm thinking about stuff. I'm running errands. I'm doing stuff. That's not the way. And then we all wonder why. Man, why am I frazzled all the time? Why am I stressed out all the time? Because we don't learn to rest. We work really hard. but we don't rest really good. And what I want you to do right now with your eyes closed, and this is a strange, but I want you to practice breathing. So right now, everybody, I want you to breathe in through your nose and then exhale through your mouth. I know seems silly to some of you guys, but some of you guys, you need to do that. So this week, when you're stressed out and you're just overwhelmed and you just feel like, and maybe you go to whatever toxic thing you go to, run to the bottle, pop a pill, or go do whatever you do. Instead of doing that, just stop what you're doing and just say, I just need to breathe. And when you breathe in, like right now, breathe in through your nose. That's God's oxygen. That's God's air. He created that. And He created your nose. And He created you. And He knows exactly what you're going through. He's not forgotten your name. He still knows how many hairs are on your head. He knows what you're going through right now. He knows what stresses you out. He knows all of the worries that you have as a parent. He knows all that stuff. And I think sometimes we just need to stop and breathe and just go, okay, I serve a big God. He's in control. It's okay. I don't need to take on more. Like some of you are trying to do His job for Him. He don't need your help. He's a big God. He can handle it. All He wants you to do is breathe. And I want you this week, as you get stressed out and if you get overwhelmed, just stop what you're doing. It might be in your car, and just start breathing through your nose and breathing out through your mouth, and just remember that God's in control. So I want you